In this video, I'm going to be taking a look at the new Star Wars Mechs, building an Imperial mech factory, and I'm also going to be upgrading all 3 of the mechs to level them up to their full potential, at least as far as my mock building skills will let me. August 1st means that there are new LEGO sets being released, but this time we're getting something a little bit different. Star Wars Mechs. Like many of you, I would have preferred to get some new figure packs like the ones LEGO put out last year because that would have worked perfectly at this price point. But this is what we ended up with. Even though I was a little bit bummed out, I picked the mechs up anyways because I found them a little bit early and I thought I'd give them a try. I started with building the Stormtrooper mech. This build was small and pretty straightforward and consisted of mostly white and black pieces. It turned out pretty much as I expected. It looks fine. I like the printed tile on the chest, but I think it could have looked a little bit better, especially for $16. Next up was the Darth Vader mech. This one was the easiest to build, and it only took me about 15 minutes. This mech is the most basic of the 3 and has pretty much the same Darth Vader figure that we've seen for a while now. It feels a little skinny for a mech, but it gets the job done. The last set on the list is the Boba Fett mech. This mech has a lot more colors present, and the figure is super detailed, which I really appreciate. This is the most detailed and best looking mech of the 3, primarily because of all the great colors that are used here, and I also like the inclusion of the jetpack, definitely a nice touch. Something about building all of these mechs kind of surprised me though. I was reminded of a feeling that I had as a kid putting together my Bionicle. These mechs sort of fit into that same category of posable, buildable action figure. They definitely don't have all the articulation and joints of a Bionicle, which is a bit of a bummer, but they're still pretty cool. Here's the thing. These make no sense in Star Wars canon. They're just something that LEGO made up with no real backstory. So I'm taking it upon myself to build an Imperial mech factory to explore the idea of what it might have been like if the Empire actually had mechs like this. I wanted to begin with building some conveyor belts because that's the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of factories. I checked my parts collection and found some of these tank treads from a Technic vehicle that I parted out, so I figured those would work perfectly for the conveyor belt. I created a frame that is 2 bricks tall and added in some plates with some tiles on top, and then laid down the treads, and I had 2 conveyor belts completed. Next up, I wanted to work on some mechanical arms that could move things back and forth between the conveyor belts. I decided that these conveyor belts would be a great place in the factory for Stormtrooper arms and legs to be assembled for the mechs. Next, I started working on a large crane that could be placed in the center of the entire factory for moving around heavy equipment. I built it up pretty tall so it could be the main feature in the center of the build. Then I moved on to tiling off the entire base plate to give it a nice smooth look. I ended up buying 4 of the Stormtrooper mechs because I was thinking I might want to do something with them for a video like this, so I started building those extra packs and took the arms and legs off of them and put them on the conveyor belts. Next, I hooked up the torso of a Stormtrooper mech to the crane to make it look like it was being moved around the factory. Next, it was time to work on placing some figures. I got some Imperial ground crew members to be working at this station on the left, and then I added in a few more staff members along with an astromech droid to fill out the empty space. The next section of the factory I wanted to work on would include some scaffolding for Stormtroopers to climb up and get into their mechs. Boba Fett and Darth Vader don't really need one of these platforms because Vader can just force jump up into his mech, and I'm sure Boba Fett would just use his jetpack to get up into his. But Stormtroopers don't have the Force and not all of them have jetpacks, so this kind of scaffolding structure seemed necessary. Once I had the scaffolding structure completed, I got out another 48 by 48 gray base plate to connect everything in together with the factory. As I started tiling things off, I was thinking about what I wanted to put in this blank space on the left here. Then I remembered that I had built a crate a while ago that would fit perfectly in this space. So I grabbed the crate and filled it up with mech parts because it seemed to make sense to me that a factory like this would be shipping off mech pieces to other Imperial bases. Once everything was tiled off, I worked on placing a bunch more figures on this walkway in the front of the build, and this is how it all turned out. Overall, this is a pretty simple and straightforward mock, but I really like the way it looks. It definitely helps add some context and a story behind why these mechs would exist in the first place, or where they're coming from at least. And it's interesting to think about how a place like this might operate within the Star Wars universe if it existed. I was definitely inspired by the Geonosis droid factory for my conveyor belt section, and I'm really glad that I finally got to use this crate that I built almost a year ago at this point. So now that the mech factory is complete, it's time to work on upgrading these mechs. As far as LEGO goes, I really like the way that some of the Ninjago and Monkey Kid mechs look, but I don't have a whole lot of experience with building mechs myself, so this is going to be a little bit of a challenge for me. I want to try pulling inspiration from Japanese mechs and Gundam. There are some awesome mechs out there, and I think this inspiration is exactly what I need to take things to the next level. Let's start with Darth Vader. Looking at this Vader mech, the first thing that comes to mind that I want to change is adding a cockpit. I feel like the minifigure sticks too far out the top of the mech and it looks kind of weird. I have a couple ideas for how I could accomplish this, and I've also got some fun printed dish pieces that I want to try and incorporate here. The other thing that could be easily upgraded is the lightsaber. I think the lightsaber that's included is appropriate for the size of the mech, but given that I'm going for more of a Gundam or Japanese mech style of things, I feel like I need to up the size. The first thing I worked on was building the cockpit. Once I got that built on, I moved on to attaching some flame pieces to the back of the mech. I got those parts situated, and then I took what I think is the cockpit cover of a TIE fighter and attached that to the back of the mech to bulk it out a little bit. I also found another one of these printed dish pieces to use as an energy shield for the mech's left hand. After a couple of minor changes, I think things are massively improved here. I'm very happy with how this mech turned out. I feel like the inclusion of these TIE style dish pieces really adds to things and fits in with that Dark Empire vibe that this mech has going on. I really like the use of the red cockpit here because I think it adds a nice pop of color. Next up, I want to work on the Stormtrooper mech. Alright, so as far as the Stormtrooper goes, I'm not a really big fan of the rounded shoulder pads that they've got going on here. I think it looks fine on the legs, but I want to swap those out for something else. The biggest issue I have with this mech is this corny looking gun. Since I'm going for a Gundam style here, I want to add a gigantic sword to this figure. I also think the Stormtrooper needs a cockpit, and I think it'd be fun to try and use a couple of these Imperial logos to make flags. I started out by making some wings to add onto the top of the Stormtrooper mech. After I got that completed, I messed around a little bit and figured out a way to add some larger wings facing downwards on the back. Once I got those attached, it was time to move on to attaching the cockpit. I tried a couple of different orientations before figuring out that I should probably just attach it on the front and remove the Empire logo to use elsewhere. I added on some large black shoulder pads and then opened up one of my other Stormtrooper mechs so I could steal the 2x2 Empire logo tile out of it so I could use it for some flags on my modified version. Once that was all done, I added a sword, and this is how it turned out. I think my version of this Stormtrooper mech looks hugely improved. Obviously, this is very inspired by Gundam and Japanese mechs and not so much by just a regular Lego mech, but I think it looks awesome. I love the large sword that I added onto it. I think the wings on the back look really cool, and I especially love the use of the Empire logo tiles to make flags. This definitely took me way longer than it should have, but I couldn't be happier with it. Alright, so finally, let's tackle the Boba Fett mech. For this mech, the first thing that needs to be taken care of, just like the Stormtrooper, is this gun. I'm also going to be adding a cockpit onto the Boba Fett mech, and I would really like to keep this jetpack because I think it's a nice addition. After trying out a couple of different windshield pieces, I ended up using the same shape as the one that I used for the Vader mech. Then I started working on a rotary cannon for the mech's right arm. After I got that all figured out, I started looking for ways that I could attach a large cannon over the shoulder of the mech. This ended up being a little bit more difficult than I thought it would be, but thankfully I got it figured out. After that, I added a couple of small wings on the back of the mech's arms, and this is how it looks. I had a lot of fun with this one. I feel like it's definitely the most decked out mech as far as artillery goes, but I feel like that makes sense for Boba Fett. I think the rotary cannon looks pretty good. I really like the knife that he's got coming out of his left arm, and the shoulder cannon is a classic addition as well. I'm glad I was able to stick within the original color scheme of the Boba Fett mech, and this version of the mech addresses most of the issues that I had with the original. Let me know in the comment section down below which mech upgrade was your favorite. This definitely pushed me outside of my comfort zone, but I was pleasantly surprised by the results of these builds. Don't forget to leave a like on the video and subscribe if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I hope you have a good one.